Good afternoon. Welcome to the Script Mentor podcast. I am the Script Mentor and your host, Gino Scala. Today we have a very exciting guest. His name is Lloyd Shellenberger. I'd like to welcome you, Lloyd, to the Script Mentor podcast because you have one of the most interesting lives. You spent 43 years in the military, but you have a very specific job and responsibility while in the military.
American
As
Forces Network.
Air
American,
Forces Network, as
yep.
the radio and possibly television.
Possibly
Going
television. It is
back to
television and radio, and it's the fourth largest network in the world, actually. People aren't aware of it.
that is incredible. Now, so why don't you tell the folks exactly what you did and where you were?
Well, I started out in 1978 as a new recruit and ended up, my father wanted me out of the house because I decided to quit school and I knew more than he did. And my father said, "You need to go to the military and find out how little you really do know." And I went into the military at 17. Back then, you could join at 17. Ended up being infantry, and then I ended up being a helicopter repairman. But where it really got interesting for me as I got toward the end of my career, I spent some years doing psychological operations. And back when I was doing it, it was part of the Special Operations Group. It no longer is. They've separated along with civil affairs. But I started out doing that. And when I got too old for that and I got tapped on the shoulder by an old sergeant major who said, "You're a little long in the tooth now. You are not going to be doing this anymore." He said, "We're going to make you a broadcast journalist." So I ended up uh, being a broadcaster towards the end of my career. And I covered a lot of things in Iraq and a few stories, which, by the way, there's books coming out on those. I said, I'm like a Forrest Gump that I ended up in the middle of history, didn't mean to. I was the only broadcast journalist in the Iraqi polling booth, VIP polling booth in the convention center when they had their first free elections. That's when a
When they
lot of
first got
them,
those purple thumbs,
yep. And I was there when
I
a lot of
remember
unions
that.
voted. Yeah. And
It
we were
was
sitting in the convention center looking out the window as they were trying to dial in their mortars to hit us, the terrorists. And really, I learned a lot about the people because I spent most of my time, I spent more of my time than most soldiers outside the wire because we had to go chase the stories, we had to film them, we had to edit them, we had to bring them back and get them on air, and we had to have the deadlines done. And I was working more often than not for the State Department. So we were covering classified stories like the letters from the mass graves of Iraq, which I covered that story, the uh, Abu Ghraib, all of those stories we had to cover. And I ended up being assigned to the mass graves of Iraq. And I'm one of two people, National Geographic and us, that were allowed in there to take
wow.
to film that. And
So
I saw there's over 400 graves at the time, mass graves. And I filmed a lot of that, and I filmed a lot of the mass graves. It
the mass
was
graves, they were our dead
no, they were Kurds and
civilians.
Iraqi dissenters. A lot of people think it was just Kurds. No, there were other people, a lot of Sunnis too. And they had a method in which they would get these people out in the desert in their Sunday best, offering them work. Once they got them into the pits, the pre-dug pits, they mowed them down and buried them.
Oh,
And they even had a method for how they killed them. It was disgusting.
very reminiscent of the Nazis for
Yes.
sure. Now
Uh,
we have a movie idea of what the journalists are like. We've certainly seen Geraldo Rivera in battle on battlefields in conflict. We've seen what's his name, Jennings, Peter
I worked
Jennings,
with him. I was at the last mission.
and Brian Williams. We heard him tell stories that when he wasn't actually there. Uh, but
I can tell
you
you if
were
they were
there,
there because we used to have to vet them through the CPIC,
and
Combined Press Identification Center. So they couldn't just show up in Iraq.
right,
And as a matter of fact, Geraldo Rivera, I like him. He's a good guy.
yeah,
But he stepped over the line and went into the JSOC Center, which is the Tactical operations center with a camera. I, as a soldier with a top secret security clearance, couldn't have even pulled that off. And he got sent back to Iraq the same night.
Wow, that's a
You
great
don't do
story.
that.
Um, but I'm curious, we see the pictures of these guys. They're always wearing the sleeveless vests, brown with, I guess film cartridges back when they were shooting with film and microphones and all that. What what was your attire out in the field?
Well, it's kind of morphed over the years because broadcast journalism from an AFM perspective has gone from the guys shooting 16 millimeter. Well, these guys were shooting 16 millimeter cameras back then. We were the ones that were starting to do digital tape when I was over there. And they were DSR Sony cameras. We had that. We would have our computers. We'd have carry a lot of stuff. Then they, at the time, one of my first tours, they had us carrying an M16, and it eventually morphed to an M4, and then it eventually morphed to a pistol, which was logical because if you're carrying cameras and you're out there, and oftentimes what they don't tell you about cameramen and people carrying cameras in war zones, they are the first targets
All right.
because nobody wants to, none of the bad guys want to get it on camera what you're doing. They're going to shoot you
Just like
first.
the medical guys are targets too.
Yeah, they're going to shoot you first. We saw that in Bosnia. We saw it in Croatia. They are the first targets that people cut down. Okay, so I ended up using a 9 millimeter. I always argued why because back then, as you know, it was only for officers. They finally let down and said give these reporters a 9 millimeter. They cannot be carrying an M16 and shooting. And I would have to have this stuff done. And oftentimes, when you would have people like um, Barack Obama, and I'm having an Alzheimer's moment,
Clinton.
Joseph Biden, and any of these people, Hillary Clinton, John McCain would come, and we'd have to do what's called press packets for them that they would take back with their handlers. They would also use it for their campaigns. So my job was to do interviews with them, make sure they had a press packet for their handlers, and make sure that it went back with them. So for the most part, particularly when Biden used to come to Fallujah, I used to go with him, and he would go visit his son. And I've met his son. I've met Sarah
This
Palin's.
is Bo, right?
Yeah,
Bo Biden,
the
the one
one that
that
died.
died.
Yeah, I think he's the one that passed away from cancer. I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure.
brain
Not
cancer.
uncommon people spending time over in Iraq. But he'd come over and visit him, and I would have State Department clear me for these meetings with these generals. They didn't like it, but they had to let me in. And I did that because I looked like a civilian reporter coming in to report rather than an AFN reporter, which made no sense because when it came down to reporting on the mass graves, which they did 2 weeks before Saddam's trial, all of a sudden I was a military reporter, and it worked out well for them because they could control that.
Right. Now, how many other people were doing what you were doing? Or, I mean, you got some really important gigs there. What were you the longest tenure? Were you the most senior man? Were
No, no, no,
you
not
the
by any bit
only
far.
reporter?
I was just a staff sergeant at the time, and this was before I became eventually a first sergeant and all those other things. So I was just a staff sergeant. I was a lot kind of on the bottom of the totem pole, which is fine. Um, but because I hooked up with the State Department, I wisely hooked up with the bad guys. The AFN didn't like them because they felt they were arrogant. They couldn't work with them. I just found out that they were different and you had to approach them differently. And I got along swimmingly with them. Wonderful. Because you look at me and go, we've got somebody coming in, we don't know who it is. Well, the night before, I'd been sitting in the ambassador's office, and I knew it was President Bush or Condoleezza Rice.
Wow.
And I would wait till there was no locals or nationals in the room, and I would go, "It's President Bush. He's coming today." If you want to endear yourself to a colonel, no more than a colonel. I guarantee he'll find a way to make sure that you're shipped off to Alaska or maybe even Greenland and never come back.
Huh.
Um, And one day I did that, and he looked at me and said, "You know, I've got more intellect in my little finger than you do in your whole body, Shellenberger." And I said, "Yeah, you show it every day." That didn't go over too well.
So 2009, is that when you retired?
No, I came back and I retired 3 years ago, which would have been 2021 or 2020.
Articles and or any of the videos on YouTube? Is there any way that we can see some of your, your actual
Yeah,
recording?
you can actually go to to go to
American.
YouTube. Uh, I have or my IMDb page. I have a biography or global war on terrorism documentary on IMDb. I have my movie pilot called The Barracks on YouTube. And then you can look me up, and if you type under Sergeant First Class Lloyd Shellenberger, you'll see a lot of stuff that I wrote. And I ended up towards the end of my career being more of a print journalist.
Did you get another profession? Are you in another job?
Well, as you well know, I am a bit of a cocky writer, down to my knees a little bit by you helping me see what I need to improve, and that's what I do full time. I work part time at Warner Brothers because I have had health issues these past few years. I think I told you about that,
Yeah,
and I need that MPI care, and I refuse to let the VA touch me.
but this has been a terrific few minutes speaking with you and this entire world that, it's a perspective not many people get to see.
Well, you know what? I got to say, I want to thank you for working with me, Gino. I have learned a lot from you. To the viewers who are maybe listening to this or watching it, and on to whether you want to work with Gino or not, I'm working with Gino. I absolutely am impressed by his abilities as a writer, and he's a very impressive individual. And I can only say thank you for giving me your time because
And
Lord,
yeah, I
I appreciate it. Let me
really,
tell you something about letters from Baghdad to everybody listening. It taught me that you don't write for money. You don't write for money. You write for the love of what it can do for other people. Left Behind Letters from series is about the people we've left behind in war zones and what we can do to help them so that they don't have to die for what they've done to help us. Over 100,000 people were left in Afghanistan and Iraq. They're being killed and murdered daily for helping us. Those books and those stories bring to light what we did and how we can help these people.
the translators, there was always,
It's
they were
performance,
very
your local
close to our
national.
troops and they
Yes.
were killed as soon as we left.
I had six of them working for me. I still keep in touch with one of them called the Hulk. I don't know if he's alive. We don't know. 99% of all visas have been turned down by the State Department since 2004. 99%. And this has got to end. They have to
They're
help them
trying to get here, trying to come
trying
to
to get here.
America. It's fine.
Died in
Have them come through
their country or
Mexico
murdered in their country. Yeah. Wide open.
and
It's an
wide
easy,
open,
easy ride.
at least for a few more
I know.
months.
Yeah.
All right, my
All
friend.
right. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank
Lloyd,
you, sir.
and pleasure, and we'll speak again soon.
Yes, sir. I'm looking forward to it.